Well, hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming, I appreciate it. I'm gonna talk about finding the story. I'm just gonna jump right in. Let's get started. This is informal. Interrupt me if you have a question. Throw up a hand if you're more comfortable with that, but I'm gonna talk and then we'll have some time for questions and kind of conversation at the end, but don't hesitate to stop me if you have a question or something that you want to say. Well, I'm just going to get started. Journalists tell the truth, even when it's hard, and I have 3 hard truths that I'm going to start with. A topic is not a news story. A topic can be interesting and rich and deep and make for a terrible news story. I mean, you can't write a news story that's all about homelessness, that's all about aging. You know, these are really big topics. They're interesting, but for a story, you need something much more specific and something different. And then there are also cases where you find something really, really interesting, but your editor doesn't find it interesting. And so what do you do? And how do you get them to greenlight your idea? We are surrounded by interesting, rich stories all the time. And so this presentation is really some ideas for how to harness them, how to turn them into news stories. And I'm gonna share with you 10 tips for finding stories. I'm gonna give you examples, some of which are from my own experience, some of which are just stories that I've found and enjoyed and consumed as a news reader and listener and viewer. And these are tips for staffers, for freelancers, and why should you listen to me and my tips? My name's Lily Raff McCaulou, and I'm the advisor for the student newspaper here at COCC. And I teach journalism classes here at COCC. And I've also been a journalist for more than 20 years, including about 11 years as a staff writer at the Bulletin. I've freelanced for lots of publications, many of which you've heard of, you know, the New York Times, the Atlantic, Rolling Stone, big publications, and lots of publications that, well, in this audience, you probably have heard of them, but lots of other people haven't heard of them. I've written a book, so I've found a lot of stories in my career. And the main reason that you should listen to me and my advice is because finding stories is my favorite part of being a journalist. It's the absolute best thing about it, in my opinion. It's exciting and full of hope, and when you come up with a great story idea, it's just energizing and exciting, and you haven't necessarily like hit those barriers yet, or kind of had to face the fact that the story hasn't turned out the way you'd hoped. So it's kind of the pure optimism of journalism, in my opinion. It's the really fun, good part. So here are my 10 tips. The first one is make sure it's newsworthy. This is a really big mistake that I see a lot of young aspiring journalists make. They see a story, they bring it in, they feel like it's interesting, but editors and producers are really looking for newsworthiness. What makes something newsworthy?
Things that people want to, rest of the people want to know.
Yeah, and it can be subjective, right? Like the kind of answer that a lot of times it comes down to is it's newsworthy if your editor or producer says it's newsworthy. But it's a little bit more. There's a better answer than that. What's that?
How about current?
Current, yes. The timeliness of a story is really important. Yeah.
How much of an impact it's going to have on the community that you're seeing?
Yes,
how
absolutely.
How important is it to them?
What's the consequence of that news item? Yeah. So I'm going to share 5 news determinants with you. These are what I teach in my classes. If you Google news determinants, you will get some people have a list of 21 news determinants, and some people have 7. These are the 5 that, in my opinion, kind of cover it all. If you find a list of 20, they're kind of different words for these, in my opinion. But everybody, again, it's like so many things, it's subjective. So prominence, proximity, impact or consequence, timeliness, and human interest. And you all already covered some of these. I'm just gonna really quickly kind of explain what I mean. Prominence can refer to people, places, you name it. The example that I always give in my classes here is if a COCC student gets arrested for a DUI, it's not necessarily newsworthy. If the COCC president gets arrested for a DUI, that's news. That person is a more prominent person. You know, we could talk about place, all these things. You get the idea. Proximity. You know, a fire that burns the automotive department in a community college in Iowa is probably not news here. But if there's a fire in the automotive department at COCC, that's news. That's big news here. Impact or consequence. This is how, if you're covering the city council meeting and, you know, they pass two different motions in the meeting, and one of which is kind of a housekeeping thing. They're trying to update the code to make it reflect, you know, the file servers that they have or how the internet works or whatever, versus, you know, some sort of new tax or something that's actually going to impact people. Timeliness. I had a student a couple of years ago who wanted to do a story about the Salem witch trials, which, if you're familiar with, happened several hundred years ago. And, you know, the timeliness was an issue for me, and I'm the advisor, I'm not the student editor or anything like that. But with some encouragement, she actually worked on her story and connected it to Halloween and printed it around Halloween. And so there are ways kind of around some of these. And obviously not every story needs to hit all of these news determinants, but you need something to hang your story on. And this is true even if you are pitching to like a feature-y publication, a magazine or something. There are some workarounds with a really feature-y publication or podcast or something like that, where oftentimes they have like themed issues or episodes, and that can be kind of a version of the timeliness, right? If your story fits a theme for an upcoming issue, that might get an editor more interested in it. Human interest is really just what it sounds like. When that lost dog turns up, you know, 200 miles and 3 months later and reunites with its family, it just like pulls on the heartstrings so much that you know people are going to want to read it, even if it's not, you know, news in terms of these other categories here. Okay. My second tip is to focus on a person. And if you take away one thing from my presentation, this is my main tip for journalists is, if you want people to care about a topic, find a person for them to care about. People care about people. And you can get people to care about people. So find a main character for your story. Many years ago, I wanted to write about noxious weeds. I was really interested in, do you all know what noxious weeds are? Okay, I was really interested in them, and I could not get my editor interested in them. This is actually a noxious weed. It's called the yellow flag iris. And I didn't know about this particular weed, but I was like pitching all these stories related to it, like, no, listen, it's so interesting. There's an economic impact, all this stuff. And my editor at one point just looked at me and said, Lily, nobody cares. Like, who is going to read? You know, I was writing for our like Sunday magazine at the time, so I was writing these, you know, 3,000 word pieces, and he was like, nobody is going to read 3,000 words about a weed. Like, it just, people don't care. I would have too. I actually own Weeds of the West, which is like a book that's like this thick, and I refer to it pretty frequently. But then I found this guy, Gary Clowers, and he was obsessed with this one particular weed, the yellow flag iris, and his life kind of started to revolve around it. And he was just like, he would map the weed. This was like before GPS was really advanced or anything. He would like by hand write down where these weeds were on the Deschutes. He would canoe different parts of the river. The iris grows in the water. And it was just like spreading all over, and it was in canals and all this stuff. And he was just obsessed. He would like go to every public meeting he could and talk to people about it. And I kind of used him, and I finally got my editor interested. And the story turned out great. It was so interesting, and it was so relevant to people. There's all this money that was being lost. It was causing huge problems for farmers. It was a great way to tell the story about noxious weeds in general, focus on this one person, his obsession. So find a person. This can work for almost anything if you find a main character. Okay, my next tip is to zoom in. Let's say you have to cover a live event that's really, really big, like the Oregon State Fair, which covers many days, thousands of people go to it. There's people, animals, food, rides, competitions. What's your story? It could be a really boring story that kind of just reads like stats or like a summary of what happened. But if you are, my advice is to don't try to cover it all. Like choose one interesting thing and zoom in on it. And if you are Samantha Swindler, who's a really great writer for the Oregonian, if you're not familiar with her work, like anything that she reads, I recommend my students read too. She's just a great writer. She found, okay, this was her story a couple years ago about the Oregon State Fair. First come the tablecloths, fine china, flatware, and stemware, and then come the rulers. At the Oregon State Fair table setting competition, precision is everything. On August 24th, 2 days before the fair opened, table setters assembled their entries inside the Creative Living Pavilion at the Salem Fairgrounds. Barbara Leone of Portland used a tape measure while laying her tablecloth. She pinned a needle at the halfway point on each table edge, looped a piece of thread around each needle, and stretched the thread across the table to create temporary guidelines so her floral centerpiece and charger plates were perfectly centered. That's the start of her story. It turns out that the table setting competition is the event at the Oregon State Fair that fills up the fastest every year. Yes, for the people enrolling in the competition. So she found this like the weirdest thing probably at the Oregon State Fair, and she just zoomed in on that. And it's a great story. And obviously the Oregonian had other stories about the Oregon State Fair, so she didn't have to do it all. But even if you had to just write one story about the Oregon State Fair, you could have a paragraph in there that talked about the rest of the fair. It would get people to read it. It's an interesting story idea. Okay, my fourth tip is that your media really matters. And we live in a day and age where most journalists have to do more than one thing. This is hard for me. I mean, I was a writer. I've been a writer, and to have to take photos, do audio recording. Now sometimes I have to turn in video with my freelance work. Always have to turn in social copy. You know, you have to adjust and do different things. But there are benefits to this too. So the city of Portland recently started using this form of ranked choice voting to select city councilors, and it's the only place in the nation that uses this exact form of ranked choice voting. And let's say your editor assigns you an explainer. You know, you could write a very long and very boring and hard to follow piece that explains how Portland's ranked choice voting works, or you could do a little video. And I don't think we have sound on here. Let's see. Well, here's a little video that Oregon Live did. I guess we're not going to be able to listen to it, unfortunately. But it's this great little video. It's less than 5 minutes long. It uses donuts to explain ranked choice voting. And it's very clear, and it's very charming. And it's so much more interesting than trying to read a written piece about something as dry as ranked choice voting. So they did a little ranked choice voting experiment in the Oregonian newsroom, and they had everybody vote on their favorite type of donuts. And then they basically go through all the results here in this video for you as a way to show how the Portland city councilors are going to be elected, or were elected in this past fall. It's so clever, and it's so simple, and it's so much better than a written piece about the same topic would have been. Yeah.
What I also like about this one is that it's using video as opposed to, like, you know, when people think about like explanatory videos, they think of like motion graphics and complexity of like tools, but this one is like, you just document your table. And
hands picking up donuts and like eating, you know, people eating donuts. It's true. It's actual video, and it makes it so much more compelling. Yes, exactly. It's great. I mean, it's the only thing that got me to actually understand Portland's weird ranked choice voting system. All right, my fifth tip is to follow the news. You all probably already do this, but other reporters put in a lot of good hard work to get stories, and they can lead you to other stories. There are, local angles for like every national story, and actually one of the things that I meant to do to set up here was to look at a national news site, and let's just take a second and look at this. And there are so many stories here. I don't want to sign in with Google. There are so many stories here that are national stories that somebody's put a lot of time in, and you could find a local angle, or you could find a person in your community that illustrates this story. The wholesale prices just jumped the most in 3 years. That's a sign consumers may pay more. We've got a lot of stuff about Russia and Putin. We've got something here about the last 2 Navajo code talkers. There's so many. The one that I keep thinking about is like, with all these federal cuts that are happening, there are impacts in every community that every one of you covers. There are people who, were offered the Doge early retirement buyouts in all of your communities. I mean, there are thousands of federal employees here in Oregon, some of whom took this buyout deal, and after October, they're not going to be getting paid anymore. And what is their life going to be like? What are they going to do? Telling some of those stories. And so there are different angles and aspects to every story. And I think it's really important as a journalist to be reading, listening, watching, knowing what's happening in places outside of your own community, and then you can think about that and get ideas. And really bring some of these stories home for your readers. How are these bigger national or international things affecting people in your own community? All right, this is a real test of my PowerPoint skills. Yeah.
On that last topic, we had, on the very first round of cuts, we had a gentleman who sold everything he had, moved from the East Coast out here because he was promised a job with the Forest Service at our local district. He no sooner got in, and because he was the last one in,
Right.
got cut immediately. He was reinstated, but by the time that happened, he had already found another job. But, put his whole life into coming out here because this was his dream job.
Yeah, and there's so many stories like that to tell, and they're just going to be more and more too, right? Like a lot of the people who were cut in that first round by Doge are being rehired now, and so there's kind of like updates to some of those stories too. My sixth tip is really just having a great idea for a story doesn't mean it's necessarily time to get your editor excited about it and have them put it on their budget. Editors have different, and producers have different concerns and motivations than you do. And so it's really important to be realistic with yourself and with your supervisors about what a story is going to take. It's really important to think, do you have sources on the record? Do you have all the files and statistics and documents that you need to back up your story? Is there a clear path for how to write your story or tell your story? Do you know how to tell your story? And does it fit in the format and the time and the space? And so really being clear-eyed about that with yourself and your supervisor is really important, I think. You get into a difficult situation if you have a reputation or a pattern of being somebody who doesn't necessarily deliver what they've promised. And so it's easy, sometimes it can be easy to get excited about a story, get the green light, and then kind of realize how much work is involved. My seventh tip is to be patient and chip away at things. And this is related to the be realistic. So sometimes a story is a great idea and it's just going to take a lot of work. And so you need to kind of plan out your time and chip away at it over time. So we talked about this for a second before my presentation started. In 2008, what was happening? What was the big news in 2008? housing. There was a huge financial crisis in 2008. The housing market had crashed. More and more people were declaring bankruptcy, going through foreclosure. There were all these statistics that were coming out, and I was working for the Bulletin at the time, and I thought, what I think would be a really great story is if I found one person who was going through bankruptcy and get them to open up to me and really share what it was like, share their financial information, share what happened, share their feelings about what happened. And so there were so many stories coming out every day that were full of statistics, and there weren't really any stories that like delved into one person's, this kind of follows my advice of zoom in, right? Find a main character, zoom in. So I was working at the Bulletin, which ran bankruptcy notices in the legal section of the paper. And so what I started doing was calling people. I would look up their contact information, and I would call people. And I called more than 300 people who were going through bankruptcy in Central Oregon. I left them messages, I explained who I was and what I had in mind and what I was working on. I got very good at my little elevator pitch for my story because I had to explain it 300 sometimes. And I had other stories that I was working on each week. So what I did was I decided, okay, every day I'm gonna call 10 to 15 people. And so I would do that, and it took a lot of time. Sometimes I'd call 2 or 3 people in the morning. I'd call people while my editor was reading my story for the day. So I'd call like 7 or 8 people, 10 people maybe in the evening. And I did this for weeks. Every day I called 10 to 15 people. And then eventually a guy called me back. He heard my message. He said, I heard your message, and I thought, no way. And I was about to delete it, and then I thought, I'm just gonna hang on to that for a second. And he kept it, and he kept thinking about it. And then after a few days, he called me, and he said, I'm considering telling you my story. Can we meet? And we met, and we talked. And my editor knew that I was working on this story, and he knew that I was calling all these people. But we had the kind of relationship where he wasn't pressuring me to like turn this story around quickly. He knew that I was going to be chipping away at it long term, and that until I found the right person, it was not to enter any news budgets whatsoever. But it worked. Eventually I found this guy, and he was incredibly open with me. His story was so typical too. He was somebody who had a bunch of medical problems, and that's kind of what led to his he had to stop working for a long time. He had back surgery. He worked in sales, and so he got some kind of short-term disability insurance, but the way that his pay was structured, a lot of his pay was in commissions. It wasn't salary, and so he was getting his disability based on his salary. It was like 30% of his salary, which was a very small portion of his income, and it didn't allow him and his wife to continue making their mortgage payments. And it was a very typical kind of combination of different factors that a lot of people were going through. It ended up being this great story because I found the right person, and it took so long to find him. I didn't know when I started how long it was going to take, and I might not have done it if I'd known how long it was going to take, but I'm glad I did. Okay, my 8th tip might have a typo. Keep your antenna up, or maybe your antennas. I kind of like couldn't decide if I meant like bug antenna or like lifting up the antenna to like get the signal. But what I mean by this is it really takes practice to get good at noticing the stories that are around you. So, but with practice, you get in the habit of noticing. And that's really what I think a lot of finding stories is about noticing. And once you do this and you like develop your spidey sense and it tingles whenever you can never turn it off, which is great. I think of story ideas all the time, and I barely work as a journalist anymore, but I think of stories like, I come up with story ideas 4 or 5 times a day. It's just like, I can't not think about it anymore. And it's great. Like, you notice stories when you drive to work, when you FaceTime with your mom, when you I had this experience recently where I was at book club, and we were like sitting in my friend's patio, and we all had a glass of wine, and there was like this faint sewage smell, and I asked my friend about it. This is kind of a gross example, but she was like, oh yeah, the whole neighborhood smells like this time of year. I don't know. We don't know what it is. And I was like, has anything been written about this? Like, what? Like, come on, we need to get on this. You know, you just kind of can't shut that off, which is a good thing. Stories are everywhere, and you will find them, and it just, you know, a lot of it is just being open and practicing, exercising that muscle.
What was the smell? Don't leave us hanging.
Don't leave us hanging.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an issue with the sewer system. They have like one of the sewer collection pumps nearby, and there's some issue there. Somebody should look into this. I can tell you what neighborhood it is, and you can go after it. My 9th tip is to know your editor or your producer. You know, I said this earlier, like, who decides what's news? If your editor, that's who decides it's news, it's not news. Yes, do the story, don't do the story. Your producer. And so it's really helpful to work with that person, kind of know their tastes, understand what kind of stories get them excited, or even like, this is going to sound manipulative, but what part of your story to emphasize when you're talking to them about it to get them to greenlight your story. I don't mean to be manipulative, I just mean to be pragmatic and practical. And this is true if you're freelancing. You know, part of your job as a freelancer is to like know which outlet to pitch to. Hopefully you develop relationships with different editors, and you kind of know what they like and what they don't like. And you can also, sometimes if you have a good relationship with an editor at, you know, a magazine or something that you freelance for, is you can tell them a story idea that you have that you're chipping away at, that you're working on, and see if it fits in some upcoming issue or something, or if they can give you. It's really helpful if you have a good editor and you can work together on story ideas and kind of hash them out. Hey, I'm really interested in this, and I'd love to find a way to tell a story about this topic. Do you have any ideas? Do you have any feedback for me? What's interesting to you about this? What's boring to you about this? Editors are such great. A lot of them have been journalists. They've gone through this before. They have that news sense. They have that storytelling sense. And so they can really be helpful. The flip side of this is working with your editor helps you avoid something that I talked about before, which was avoiding over-promising and under-delivering on stories. And this is something that I hear, feedback that I hear from editors a lot about, kind of complaints that they have about reporters. Your reputation really matters inside and outside of the newsroom. It's really like your biggest asset as a journalist. And so you don't want to be in a position, again, I said this earlier, but you don't want to be in a position where your editor is skeptical of your stories, that they're not sure you're actually going to be able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. So knowing your editor, working with your editor, building trust with that editor is really important.
What if you are that person?
You're the editor?
Everything. It sounds like you and I are similar.
We're not.
Yeah.
The whole, there's nobody else.
That's really interesting. You know, something that I do in my classes is that I tell my students that they really need a writing buddy. That is really important. And if they don't have a writing buddy, I'll be their writing buddy. Because I think that so many, and I teach news writing, and a lot of times when somebody bumps up against some sort of challenge with writing a story, I think it really helps to just talk it out with somebody. Sometimes it takes like a minute or 2 minutes. If you just put the pen down or step away from the keyboard and talk about what you're struggling with, it's so much more efficient, and you can kind of realize what the problem is and what needs to happen. And I think that the same thing could be true for reporting and coming up with, you know, all these things. Like, if I were a one-woman show, I would try to find somebody, and maybe another one-person show is the ticket. Find somebody that you can talk to, even if it's like, you know, every couple weeks or something. Just sit down and here's what's really been hard for me, and I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, I think especially in very small towns, what we tend to get is everybody comes, George,
You should do this.
You need to report on this.
Yeah.
And you know, it's like this is important to you.
Yeah.
So you have to kindly say, well, we'll
Yeah.
look into it.
Yeah.
I get a lot of stories, supposedly, but they're not really stories. And so sometimes I dig a little further, but a lot of times it's just, everybody
You're
wants to give you a tip.
You're really teeing up my 10th tip here in a second. But yeah, it's true. That's really hard. And I know, like, I covered really small rural areas, and people would sometimes be really critical of, like, you always write about bad things, and you never write about good things. And I told them, well, tell me the good things. Like, I only write about what I find out about, right? So tell me the good things. And oftentimes they would stop to think about it, and then they would come up with a few more bad things for me to write about, and they'd have trouble with the good things.
Don't forget people you used to work with.
Yeah,
I have 5 or 6 people that I've worked with over time,
yeah,
and I go to them when there's nobody
yeah.
in the office currently that has that experience.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. I mean, I think too, in a really small town where you have to be the the voice of objectivity in a way, maybe finding somebody outside of that community that you can bounce ideas off of with. It's really helpful too. Like, I've been a journalist for a long time, but I'm really new to advising the student newspaper. I've just been here since 2021, at COCC, I mean, since 2021. And finding other people who do that, who are like me, journalists or former journalists, and they're like trying to adjust to these new expectations and kind of this new role. It's just so helpful. Like Camilla Mortensen, who's going to be here this afternoon, she and I barely know each other, but I feel this kinship with her because we're in the same boat, you know, on different sides of the Cascades. Just having somebody that you can kind of commiserate with and bounce ideas off of and say, how did you deal with this?
Yeah, I meet with our previous editor who did 30 years in
yeah.
the news business, and so I cry on his shoulder about once a month, and
Yeah.
he tells me what I should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, that's great. That's great perspective to have. And he knows all the characters too that you're talking about, right? The people who keep pitching bad stories to you. Yeah. Well, you're gonna love my next tip.
What are the 24 hours?
Follow every lead. And we've all had crazy people call us and tell us they have a huge scoop and it turns out to be nothing. And that's part of the job. Like I think people will pitch you things that aren't newsworthy, that aren't news, and that's part of the job. And I think part of the job is figuring out, getting good at the job and getting comfortable with that position is figuring out kind of your scripts for how to turn people down. And maybe I don't know. I haven't been in your position. But maybe it's getting some vocabulary with those news determinants to explain why it's not newsworthy, or why maybe it will be at some point, but here's why I'm choosing not to write about this now, or here's what I need to be able to write about this later.
Well, people will always give you their side.
Yes.
But there's another side, so
Yeah.
often I'll go to other people. Well, have you heard about this? Somebody told me, and they're going,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
that's not right.
Right.
They'll give you their version of it.
Yeah, that's really common. It's really common. And that's, and some of it too is just getting that practice with saying no to people. Sorry, that's not right for us for right now. But I appreciate hearing from you. Just getting those little phrases that work for you, that you don't feel too bad about using, but feel honest. And yeah, that's just part of it. But I think that the point that I wanted to make with this tip is that we are cynical and skeptical kind of by necessity in this business. It's important to be skeptical, but great stories do land in your lap sometimes. It can happen. It's happened to me a lot of times, and I just want to tell like one little story. I mean, I've gotten like big news tips that led to investigations and stuff, but this is like a little example. For the 10th anniversary of 9/11, the Bulletin was running a series of stories that were all planned in advance, and I had nothing to do with this series. And as the date got closer, the Bulletin started advertising that this was going on, right? So there was like, oh, tune in to the Bulletin for, our coverage of the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And, but I'd been, so the 10th anniversary was 2011. So I'd been at the Bulletin for like 7.5 years at this point. So I had been writing about the community a lot. My name had been in the paper a lot. People knew me inside the newsroom, outside the newsroom. So people knew my writing, they knew my work, they knew me. And during the run up to that series, when these ads were running, a woman called my number at the paper and said, hey, I saw that there's gonna be this series about 9/11, and I don't know if you're still looking for story ideas, but my daughter was in the South Tower, and she survived, and she lives in Bend now, and she has a pretty amazing story to tell, and she's never told it. She had terrible PTSD. She's never told the story to the media, but she thinks she's ready to tell the story. Would you be interested in meeting with her? So I met with her that day. I mean, this was like, 2 days before September 11th. So I met with her that day, and we spent hours together, and I heard her story. And then, over the next 24 hours, I wrote this, fact-checked and wrote this story, and it turned out to be one of the best stories I've ever written. It was incredible. She had a really amazing story, and it just it fell in my lap. I mean, she called me and told me, and that kind of thing, it does happen. It doesn't happen all that often. More often, somebody's calling and it's just their side of a familial dispute or whatever, and it's not newsworthy and it's nothing and it's annoying and it takes time out of your day. But it's worth following all the leads. And really great reporters, they do this. If somebody calls and says they have a scoop, the reporter calls them back and listens to what they say. And doesn't mean that they drop everything and they, pursue it full bore. You wanna verify and obviously trust your gut on these things. But these stories do just arrive sometimes. And really, what your goal should be as a journalist is to be the kind of person that people trust with their stories. I mean, that's the honor and that's the goal, is to be the one that when somebody does have a big story to share, they're gonna call you. Stories, beget stories too. So the more great stories you find and write, the more likely it is that somebody else is gonna share their story with you and trust you to tell it. Yeah.
One other thing in our small communities is at least responding to those leads, saying thank you for reaching out, because in small communities, they'll talk like, yeah, I told them about this story and nobody ever got back to me, or they just said, oh, not a good idea. So how we respond to those could also mean future
Absolutely.
Leads in our small communities. So.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think that it's if nothing else, when somebody reaches out to you, it's telling you somebody's paying attention, they're engaged, right? And it's an opportunity to build trust with somebody, even if all the trust is like, hey, I appreciate you reaching out. I always like hearing from readers. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to look into this story right now, but keep me in mind for future. It's being a straight shooter, right? It's still like a chance to be honest with somebody and live up to your word, even if your word at that moment is, I'm not touching that, which that's, in the long run, that's what pays off, is like having people know this is somebody who does what they say they're going to do. They're not out to get me. They're not only writing bad things about the community. They're listening. And when I hear something good, I can call them. And if it's newsworthy, they're gonna look into it. Yeah. Well, those are my tips. Here's my contact information. I can give you my phone number too if that's useful to you. But I'd just love to hear your ideas for finding great stories, challenges, whatever you're interested in talking about now. Yeah.
What we found starting up the Brownsville Times is that everybody wanted to tell their story. But as we were talking a little bit earlier on, was this relevant
Right.
Was this something that we really wanted to report on? Was it going to be of interest to most of the community? And being in a very small town, we were very sensitive to not telling the story that they wanted to tell. So we only have, 16 to 20 pages to
Yeah.
tell all this. Do you have any ideas about how to deal with that?
Yeah, what kinds of stories are people looking to tell?
I think someone wanted to tell their life stories. They thought of themselves as a writer. And,
Yeah.
and had manuscripts and such.
Yeah,
I just felt like, what we really should be focusing on was not how big we could make the paper, but
Right.
that we needed to write about what's going to be happening in the near future and what
Right.
of importance has just happened that we needed to sum up.
right. I wonder if there's a way to, I'm just spitballing. I don't know. I wonder if there's a way to work some of these people's stories into the paper, either occasionally having like a corner where you do, maybe you do a Q&A or something to kind of tame it down. Because a lot of people fancy themselves writers, and we all know that doesn't mean that they are great news writers, which is its own thing. But maybe, finding some outlet for that, like, because that's great that people in the community want to be in the newspaper that's really lovely. Like, if you could harness that, maybe by having, each issue you have a Q&A with somebody different, and you could kind of keep a list of who's interested in being contacted for the future. Or maybe even doing like some sort of themed, I don't know, I wonder if you could like do a themed issue where people tell their, like a StoryCorps kind of a thing, where people tell their stories.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just brainstorming. I don't know if that's the answer. Yeah.
Gotten away with, and I do mean gotten away with, because there is like a certain like human interest. The flip of that is that the question I wrote down is like, I love all these news elements, and I wish that like the part of my brain that now lives in like Google Analytics and engagement data could just like be completely severed from that.
Yeah.
Because like I do spend a lot of time being like, I love to listen to an old person just tell me their life story and then be like, oh, you fought in Vietnam, like everyone will read this. This is incredible, like that's newsworthy enough. And then you like see that 10 people click on it and hopefully somebody cuts it out of the paper and keeps it. But like we get so, like I always kind of feel just pulled between the engagement world now.
It's a different type of engagement, though.
Yeah.
If you have people calling and asking to be featured in, like, and you do have to balance that. Like, how much time are you going to spend on this feature that's maybe not going to get the same clicks or the same readership? You have to balance that, and maybe it's a matter of like, again, I'm just. This is off the cuff. Ignore this if it doesn't work for you. But like, maybe it's a matter of like finding a volunteer who can be the person who interviews somebody every week, and then you're not as burdened by the time constraints of it too, And again, like that's its own problem because you have to find just the right person and manage and edit their work, and it's not free, but it's something maybe.
Well, that person that you just mentioned would be the person to do that for print. First thing they need to say to the person who wants to tell their life story is, we can only give you 500 words or 1,000 words.
Right.
Now the flip side of that is we're online only, so you can write a novel in there, and if anybody, the more clicks and the more time they spend on it, the bounce rate, all those things are so important to an online newspaper, because that's what your sponsors and your donors are looking at. Well, how many people do you serve? Well, this is how many clicks we get a month. It's not about how many papers we sell, it's about clicks when you're on that platform, which is totally new to me, and I'm not tech savvy at all, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I think that's a good, you brought up another point that we're both digital and hard copy.
Oh, okay.
And so our digital format could tell those extended stories. And maybe we'll get to that point.
Yeah, and maybe it is just accepting submissions if they meet the word count or whatever, and then it's just clearly written that it's like in my own words kind of a feature, you know.
Because somebody still needs to read that whole thing, so that takes a lot
Yeah.
of time.
Right.
And do editing, if somebody puts a swear word in there, you need to be able to edit
Yeah.
that out or whatever. So it takes time for those tones that come in.
Yeah, and maybe you could do something, maybe in the print version, all you have is a photo of the person and a QR code to get to the, you know, who knows? I'm just brainstorming.
Thanks for talking about it.
But yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, I mean, it's a great sign that people want to share their stories with
Yeah.
the paper. I mean, that's
We want to.
a compliment. And yeah, if there's a way that you could harness that, that seems really valuable.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So I live now in a very conservative community, and there's of course the barrage of national information. And I'm trying to find the balance between keeping people somewhat informed, at least. So I try to find personal like stuff, okay, what directly impacts my rural community that's based on tourism and agriculture. So besides finding the personal interest story, as you talked about, what other tips do you have for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, the challenge is trying to demonstrate the consequence of some of the things that are happening statewide and nationally within your community. And I do think that there is a way to tell some of those stories that, again, that focuses on the people and the human. You can focus on the human interest aspect of those consequences. So, you know, what's happening to wheat exports with the tariff, you know, with the new tariffs, and what does that mean for the wheat farmers in the area? You know, and some of these ideas too, I would say it might be too soon to tell. So having a good relationship with people is important in part because these stories change and they're ongoing, and you don't necessarily want to force something before you can see the consequence or the impact. So I think just trying to stay, this doesn't totally answer your question, but I would just say, like, I appreciate that struggle, and that's going to be ongoing, and maybe just trying not to pressure yourself to get these stories, crank these stories out right away when, you know, with the tariffs, that's a really hard one. I mean, we've had all these 90-day pauses, and like the impacts are really hard even for economists to quantify. And so for a farmer, you might just have to kind of wait and see and keep in touch with people about it. There's a lot of wind power in your area, isn't there?
Not in our area.
Oh, okay.
But we have a big solar development that just went in, and then one that's proposed that
Okay.
is extremely controversial.
Okay. Yeah, and then a lot of the financials of
Which is
those.
difficult for me. That was what I did for 34 years, was renewable energy recycling. Like, so I already come to it with a
Yeah.
bias. I mean, that's what my career has been.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm already in this weird, like, oh, wait, I'll have to take out the advocate hat and get
Yeah.
impartial, and it's not the way I've functioned before. I've always
Yeah.
been an advocate.
Yeah, that's really hard. That's a really hard position to be in. You have to remove the advocacy hat, but retain all the knowledge that you've gained from all the work in that industry too, which I think can be really challenging, like untangling those. Yeah, that's really hard. That's really hard to try to be doing it all yourself too.
What paper are you working?
The South Wasco Times, so we're based in Maupin, and then we serve South Wasco County, We only produce, it's only a print newspaper, 500 copies a month. And so about 70 of those go outside the county or like away from Lafayette.
So it's a monthly.
It's a monthly.
Mm-hmm. Have any of you all worked in an advocacy position before coming to journalism? I haven't, so that's...
Yeah, that's very particular with something where, because like as an education reporter, a joke that I used to make with teachers is that like, I was always like, I'm not coming to this ever as anti-public education. Like, an education reporter should never have the sort of adversarial relationship with the institution that I think a court reporter should. Because you're covering schools, which as taxpayers we're all constituents in. So you're gonna have an inherent bias toward you want them to succeed. And if you're a business reporter covering Facebook, you don't go into Facebook like, I would love Facebook to succeed. Like you actually probably have a bit of the opposite, which is like a healthy skepticism. But that doesn't mean that I'm siding with the school district on every decision. That's like siding with the principal and the student. Like, but I do think that there's like a version of bias that you can just sort of own. I was always glad I didn't cover Portland Public Schools, for example, because then you're just getting into your personal. So I do think the advocacy fine line has changed a lot.
Yeah.
Because the idea of like thinking of national competitors that my readers are also consuming, it's like, I'm never going to compete with the red meat of Fox News. Like that's entertainment. Like, this is the most popular television, this is the most popular television channel in the nation. So I think having a bias towards like the community and collaborating with the community, but I don't know. I wouldn't be able to wrap my head around that because you're obviously probably talking to people who are like, I don't want wind power here under any circumstance.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're like, well, here's all the benefits of wind power generally, like, yeah.
Well, and not, it's solar, but that's
Yeah.
irrelevant. But yeah, not only that, it's like you go to Facebook and they have these Facebook, and they panels leak and they, like there's so much spewing of misinformation and you're just like,
That's why there's us.
They're lucky to have you though, with even if you are constantly trying to tamp down that advocacy part, you have all this knowledge about it that you can still share with the community. And how they receive that is to a certain degree up to them. I mean, some of it has to do with how you present it and how you tell the stories. I think that with disinformation, that's really hard. We could do a whole session on that, right? When people are spewing incorrect information about, the dangers of solar panels, how you deal with that. There are different strategies for how to deal with that. I think you have a benefit though, being in a small community where people are, it may not always seem like it, but people are more inclined to listen to one another because it's a small community and they know each other and see each other. It's harder to be anonymous and spew that kind of information.
well, and I think it also, for me, it poses a bigger challenge. I actually moved there to start an eat-by-parental business. So I have a business that's sort of like I'm trying to build. And the last thing you want to do is piss off the, the people around you. And so I feel this like real struggle with, do I want to report on the school board? No, I really don't. I really don't. Not only do I not have time, but I don't want to, I found myself already like in the middle of these big controversies, like where, the biggest hotel, like totally broke, it seems, so it seems, based on my land use planning knowledge, they violated a bunch of stuff. And so I went ahead and I reported on that, and boy, that did not serve me well, I'll tell you that. So it's really, kind of made me back away from more controversial stuff, which is unfortunate, I feel.
Yeah. It is. I'm gonna get to you because you've had your hand up for a while.
Thanks. ProPublica had an article last week about disinformation killing the wildfire map. And the state legislators who said, well, it could happen,
Right.
and pointing to Facebook anonymous posts that killed legislation, purely false information. The other thing is, I live in Medford, I've lived there 3 years. The newspaper went out of business about a year after I moved there. They took their website down. Don't forget people who are just moving to your area, who don't know the history, all the players, the events. We're trying to find information about those things to become part of the community. And I often end up going directly to the people and getting the information that way. Not everybody has that resource.
So you're reestablishing the paper?
Now, I run the PBS station.
Oh, I see.
But there is a movement to regenerate, I think, an online paper down there only.
It still doesn't have 100 years of archive of the Mail Tribune.
But people still need that.
Do they have it in the library? Do they have an archive in the library?
I don't think so.
Gosh,
So
it seems like the
just-
library should,
Yeah, just remember your role as
right,
a community steward in
Right.
addition to a journalist.
right. Which kind of ties too to the telling people stories, right? Like there's a community benefit to that if you can find a way to get
It's
that
2
in
days a
there.
week.
I work for Greater Eastern Oregon, so I.
And there's an online news source in Ashland, but there's a couple 100,000 people in that area and there's not a lot of reporting going on.
And there was a whole AI version of the Ashland
Stealing
paper
OPB
too.
and
Yeah.
other stories.
Yeah, it was one of the weirdest local media. Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the things I learned, and I think it was from last year's conference, was the best we can do is just present the facts, all the facts, both sides as much as we can, and the people have to decide. Unlike Facebook, where you can get on there
Right.
and say whatever you want, our job is to present the facts.
Yeah,
And then,
So you can quote someone who's misrepresenting the subject along with an expert who has.
absolutely, get both sides, lay it out there, and let your readers decide.
well, I think that you have an obligation as the arbiter of the truth. If you know something is false, you need to say that. So you could quote them maybe if they're newsworthy and they're, if it's the mayor who's repeating some sort of lie. But I think ethically, if you know it's false, you need to
When I say
identify.
both sides, I mean the facts from both sides.
Okay.
A
Yeah.
lot of times they don't, one side usually doesn't have any facts, only conjecture.
The current story we're hearing is not, let's see, the idea is that you report, the glass is not necessarily half full or half empty. It's an 8-ounce glass with 4 ounces of water. And I'm trying to remember that as I write.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Andrew.
There's something that Google released, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, where basically when you upload any content, like on YouTube, their decision was basically to have a trigger that says that this was produced by humans, as opposed to the other way. Because very shortly, I think by default, everything that we're going to see on the internet is going to be assumed not.
Right.
Like that's going to be the default mode because of all the AI
Of course,
crap that's out
if it's uploaded by a human, it's not true necessarily.
Well, that's just it, right? Like that's the qualifier though,
Yeah.
from their perspective.
Yeah.
So I think battling misinformation is a lost cause, honestly. I think what is more important is the bipartisanship, the partisanship that we're going through. So it's really about bringing communities together. That's our role as journalists, my belief.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a couple resources that I would point to. So I'm an academic in so apologies. In terms of resources, so there's a book by Monica Guzman called I Never Thought of It That Way, and her framing of approaching communities is really asking, how did you come to believe what you believe, is sort of like her default question, which is again, flips that conversation. The other one would be this notion of like, whether it's wind power or whatever, it's really coming back to how do you name and frame a story or an issue, right? So you can go into like gun access and gun rights, but reframing it as safety for our families is a much more common ground approach, as opposed to identifying the more heated topics and issues. And then the other one I would think about is there's another resource when you're looking at bridging words, is how do you report your story using words that can connect on both sides of the aisle, right?
What was that second one?
It's called, I forgot the name of it, but it's if you Google like bridgy words, it just sort of identifies, they did a study in the last couple of years about which words people kind of are more open to versus words that stops the conversation from being one, right? So patriot obviously is a very triggering word, but the word community is something that's more bridgy because everybody identifies to a community.
I guess that kind of segues into the idea of solutions journalism, where you're trying to bring people together to solve a common problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Camilla's session this afternoon, I think.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, I'm very pro dead internet theory because I long for it to just be such AI slop that we're all just like, let's produce
Right.
everything. It's like, we're gonna reinvent the magazine, they're gonna be like, there's nothing in here. It's weird to say it was like pro gatekeeping, like that sort of feels like you're putting a crown on yourself, but sometimes just having to have a bit of the attitude of like, I never like to say arbiter of the truth because that sounds so dramatic. I'm only 30. But sometimes it is nice to just be like, I'm not putting that in the story because that's, I mean,
yeah, that's dramatic phrasing, but at the end of the day, it's your job.
Yeah, it's
too.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny to borrow a word that feels very like influencery, but like authenticity of the community trusts me.
Right.
Because even if they are more rural community and they literally refer to me as a city rat, they like me well enough that they're like, well, Matt, he's not making things up. Like, we can trust him.
Right.
And then I also do worry about just framing stories inside of compromise when I think there is a lot of fallacy, of, at least in politics right now, about like, if a compromise is between take away everyone's rights and let them have their rights, and then the compromise is we're gonna take away most of your rights, like, come on, like, we have to like have a bit of like siding justice over siding with power. Like, it's the moral imperative, but I try to be authentic, even if they're like, he's so obviously from Portland originally. He looks silly in a cowboy.
Right, and I think that's, I moved from New York City to Bend in 2004. I moved from Manhattan to Bend to cover La Pine and Northern Klamath County. And it was, people were very skeptical of me, but I did make it work. I mean, that's what a lot of it came down to, was like, hey, I just moved here from New York City, but I'm gonna sit and listen to you. I'm gonna, everybody knew what car I drove, and they would see me every day, driving around the community, and it takes time and it takes, work to build that trust, but it can definitely be done.
One of the reasons our former paper went out of business was that they wrote a story about the city council, and because of the MAGA mood or mentality, they organized to unsubscribe, and one of the main reasons for the paper going out of business. So it's kind of touchy to, I think we're playing it pretty safe, maybe even too safe right now, and but I think we should attempt to push the boundaries of what we discuss
Well,
and
to continue that conversation, we have to have a way of doing it that brings everybody in.
Right.
Some of these ideas have been brought up in discussion.
yeah.
So one idea, when come and bring people in, one of the things that I've been recognizing as well is this need to, like, if you don't have an events calendar on your outlet, in your publication, that's the first thing, right? Because events bring people together. Right? So if you can like make it easy for people to recognize how to come together as a community, that's a public service that I think every outlet should be
That's
doing.
what we're trying
That
to
is
focus
my
on.
centerfold,
Perfect.
the
Yeah.
community events.
Yeah. There's I'm sure people remember Robert Putnam's book, Walking Alone. So there's a documentary out about him recently that just came out, and it's on Netflix, and worth a watch. But the whole premise of that documentary was join a club, right? Because when you join a club, you meet people, and you meet like minds. And it could be like minds with different political perspectives, but it is of common interest of like coin collecting or, you know, badminton, right? Like that's something that, without any political perspective, it's like, it's just bringing people together with the common ground.
Yeah.
And then let's start that conversation then.
Sorry, we're at time, so I'm covering it up.
Okay. Thank you all so much. This was great. Thank you for the conversation and ideas. Yeah, thank you.